welcome to a discussion on religion, culture, and society. Religion, as you know, is an institution which is almost universal to every society, human society that is. It's a very complex institution which has many aspects that are part of the society. It is not only related to religious belief systems and the accompanying practices such as rituals and various other cultural practices, but it is also related to economic and political systems and aspects of the society. Not only is it related to the individual and personalized experience of spirituality and the other world, but it is also related to the organizational principles or aspects that bring a collective identity. You know, like when we talk about sects, nations, even nations or societies that are somehow grouped around religious identity, for instance. India, as you know, is home to some of the major religions such as Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism and Sikhism. Sociologists have analyzed these complexities of religion in various ways and have come up with various perspectives and theories and so on. With us in the studios is Professor T.N. Madan, an eminent scholar, a professor of emeritus of sociology at the Institute of Economic Growth. He's also recently received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Indian Sociological Society. His specializations include the Indian society and its various structures, the sociology of religion and secularism. I think I will start right away by posing a question which is very general. Professor Madan, thank you so very much for coming to our studios. I'm very glad that you're here. Let me start right away with a question. And the question is, how would you relate religion, culture and society in a very general sense, and how would you relate it to some of the major religions of the world?
Well, thank you very much. I am pleased to be here, and you have in your introductory remarks provided me the cues, just the cues I need to speak on this subject. I guess one can say that to speak of religion, culture and society can mean two things. In the first place, it can mean that society is multidimensional, as you said, that it has many aspects. It can also mean that religion also is multidimensional. Religion is not only one of the aspects of society, alongside the economy and politics and so on, but religion itself can be seen to have many aspects to it, and society and culture can be seen in that light, related to religion as aspects of religion, as settings in the presence of which religion emerges as social reality. When we speak of religion having a social aspect, we would think of religious roles like that of a priest, for instance, or that of a pilgrim, for instance, or lay people, householders performing religious roles, performing religious ceremonies. You mentioned rituals. One can also, looking at religion as having a sociological or social aspect, one can also think of religion as institutions, a set of institutions within a society. For instance, the church in Christian society, or the Sangha in Buddhist society. Or you can think of religious communities like the Lingayat of South India, who have their Mutt monastery perhaps. Or you can think of Muslims having the Waqf, which are institutionalized bodies looking after properties which are used for common benefit. Similarly, we can think of religion as having a cultural dimension to it. beliefs. You believe in God, for instance, or you believe in afterlife, or you believe in something supernatural, which need not necessarily mean belief in a single God. It can be polytheism, many gods, monotheism, one God, abstract ideas like the Vedantic idea of Brahman. Now, so there is a whole set of beliefs about something other than our own world, the supernatural, and a set of beliefs about our own lives, like when I die, do I have an afterlife? Now these are religious beliefs. These represent partly the cultural dimension of religion. Then there is the whole issue of connecting, linking up with this other world, the supernatural world. And the most common way in which this is done is, say, by prayer. People pray, people do puja, people go to church for mass, or people go to a mosque for Friday prayers. Or as far as our own lives are concerned, we have life cycle rituals. Christians baptize their children. There are initiation ceremonies among Jews, among Christians, among Hindus, or there are rituals performed for the dead. So we find two kinds of activities which comprise the cultural dimension of religion. One is the whole range of activities which helps us to connect with the supernatural, in whatever way the supernatural is conceptualized, as God or as many gods or as abstract power, and also to organize our own lives in a way which introduces a moral element into our lives, efforts to bring about moral perfection in our lives by performing life cycle rituals. Now, if you look at religion like this as being one of the aspects of society, or you look at religion as having a sociological or a social, let us say, and a cultural dimension, this represents a mode of conceptualization which is very general and common in sociological literature. We have the sociological distinction between the sacred and the profane, which we attribute to the very distinguished French sociologist Durkheim. But coming to think of it, the distinction between the sacred and the profane, between the religious and the secular, is really a Christian idea. And as you know, all our founding fathers had, whether they were rationalists or atheists or believers, they all had a Christian background. And this idea of there being a religious and a secular aspect of life is a Christian idea. Two kingdoms, the kingdom of God, represented on the earth in the Roman Catholic Church by the Pope, and then the worldly kingdoms. Behind these two notions of two kingdoms are two notions of power. You can say the authority of the religious domain parallels the temporal power of the secular domain. So this idea of a dualistic conceptualization of society in terms of religion, culture and society representing the secular dimension, and religion representing the sacred dimension. This is sociological, but it is also Christian. Naturally, the question arises, what about other world religions? And here, as you know, Hinduism, or what we call Hinduism, and Islam, two great world religions, they do not make this distinction. They are holistic rather than they have a conception which is holistic rather than differentiated. The secular is included in the religious. We have a very old conceptualization of this within the Hindu tradition, in the notion of the Purusharthas. Dharma is the overarching moral framework under which everything else is included. So under Dharma we get Artha, economic and political goals which are to be pursued and which are not non-religious. And then there is Kama, the pursuit of aesthetic and physical enjoyments. So within non-Christian religious traditions like Hinduism and Islam, the distinction between the sacred and the profane, or the religious and the secular, is not that sharply made. Not that these distinctions are not recognized, but the manner in which they are conceptualized is hierarchical. The secular is included in the religious. But Buddhism is in fact the most crucial case in this regard, because Buddhism is non-theistic. Buddhism questions the very fundamentals of those religions like Christianity, like Judaism, like Islam, where belief in God is central. The Buddha was silent on the issue of the existence of God. He said the question didn't interest him. What interested him was what human beings could do with their lives, how they could make their lives morally better, if not perfect. Now, this seems to me would perhaps provide an opening, kind of a statement in answer to your question.
I had a small intervention here,
Yeah.
more than a question, which is when you said about Buddhism as being non-theistic in its orientation, essentially, but it does become a religious practice when you really look at it in terms of all the Buddhist religions that are available across the world, which actually makes me ask this question, but is there a sociological definition or an understanding to what we can call essentially a religion that can be seen as a...
We can make an effort. It's a difficult thing. Sociologists like Max Weber refuse to do it. They say the definition of religion is something that can be left to the end of the inquiry about particular religions. But I would say by and large, if we put together sociological studies of different religions and theoretical statements about religion, we can provide a sociological kind of a profile of what might constitute a definition of religion. I think the first idea is something set apart, something outside our world. This is the idea of something above us, something outside our world, something transcendent. So you have the supernatural, for instance, something set apart. But when something is set apart, you may like to forget about it. But the interesting thing about religion is that what is set apart, what is said to be other than you, what is said to be other than this world, is also said to be something with which we must connect. So the first idea is something set apart. Durkheim said, let's call it the sacred, and therefore get rid of the issue of theism, of the presence of God or the absence of God. It may not be God, it may be something else which is sacred, which is set apart, which is not part of our everyday life. But then it has to be made a part of our everyday life by linking with it, by connecting with it. I mentioned earlier prayer. Prayer is the most common way of linking with what has been set apart. You pray to God, or going on a pilgrimage, or keeping a fast. These are ways of connecting. The ways are rituals. Puja is a ritual, or performing a Vedic sacrifice, a ritual. Going to church for Mass, ritual. These are rituals, but they're also mediators. There can be role players who act as mediators between us and the other world. Magicians, sorcerers, priests, spiritual teachers, gurus. You have a whole range depending upon the kind of society you're talking about. Interpreters of religion, theologians. Now, beginning with the idea of something set apart, then recognizing the importance of connecting with it, then defining the ways in which you connect, the rituals and the mediators. What we get are particular religious traditions. Christianity does it in one way, Buddhism does it in another way. For instance, in Buddhism, you have these three pillars, the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. These three together. I take refuge in the Buddha, in the Sangha, and in the Dhamma. So this is the way I link and connect with the other. Now, what happens is that in course of time, religious traditions develop and grow. There are people who have argued that it's best not to talk of religion. We should talk of religious traditions because religion is not something fixed. Religious traditions have an existence in space and over time, and they change, they evolve. And that's why it's better to talk about religious traditions. Sometimes religious traditions may face serious challenges.
Could you say that secular traditions are one of the challenges to religious changes?
Absolutely. What is secularization? Secularization is the gradual shrinking of the space which I called sacred a little while ago. Secularization is a decline in the importance of the role of the mediators that I was talking about. So secularization is a process, a historical process, whereby more and more areas of our everyday life are released, as it were, from the control of religious ideas, like belief in God, religious institutions, like the church, religious authorities, like priests. That this is the process of secularization. But one could elaborate this a little bit and say that historically, as societies have developed internal differentiation, different areas of society have attained certain degrees of autonomy: the economy, the polity, the society, the religious domain. So this we call, as you know, you are a sociologist yourself, we call this the process of differentiation. This is one aspect of secularization. Another aspect of secularization is the narrowing of the scope of religion, which I talked about. A narrowing which can even mean a decline. And many people who would not opt for the idea of a total decline talk about privatization of religion. That religion withdraws from the public domain and it becomes a part of our private lives. Now, this is a very troublesome in the sense of being problematic. It's a very problematic idea of privatization. Within Christianity, this was easy perhaps because the Reformation had been a development within the teachings of the Christian Church, which said that every Christian is herself or himself responsible for her or his redemption. It's something between God and me. I don't need the church, I don't need the Pope, I don't need the priest, I don't need any of these other interventions. So this is the idea of privatizing. Religion is my private concern. But in religious traditions like Hinduism and Islam and Buddhism, how do you privatize? These are religions which do not recognize the public and private distinction. Like I said at the beginning, Christianity gave sociology the idea of a dualism between the sacred and the profane. Similarly, this dualism between public and private, it comes easy to a Christian, but not to, I think, a Hindu or a Muslim or a Christian.
A very related question. I know secularization as a process has its historical background, antecedents, but would you dare or care to put a date or a chronology to the secularization process?
Oh yes, we can do that. You see, the whole thing began in the West. And it began in the West in the wake of, let us say, 16th century onwards. On the one hand, there was the arrival of what has been called the Industrial Revolution, the application of science and technology to the productive activity of societies. This gave human beings a sense of control. Alongside it came the development called Enlightenment in Europe, in England. And the idea behind Enlightenment was that human beings are themselves capable of perfecting their institutions. Our true knowledge comes from our experience and not from scripture, reason, not revelation, human effort, not divine grace. Now these ideas, these are philosophical ideas. These came from Germany, these came from France, these came from England. They produced a worldview in which human beings were in charge of their lives and in charge of their future. And to give concrete sense to this particular idea was what science and technology were able to do in the domain of production, in the domain of advances in science, in the domain of advances in medicine. So what happens is, between the 16th and the 18th centuries, there's a convergence of things that people could think about and of things that people could make. And the social sciences, economics, sociology, political science, these are all the children of the Enlightenment. Behind them all lies one single idea, and that idea is we can be in charge. The German philosopher Kant said, he is regarded as the most typical philosopher of the Enlightenment. He said, have the courage to know, dare to know. And the French social philosopher Comte, whom we call the founder of sociology, he said, to know in order to control. No, to know in order to predict, and to predict in order to control. So the whole idea behind sociology and economic and political science is to control the social process. And that's what secularization is. The taking over of the responsibility for our future, for the perfection of our institutions.
Would you then say that there are some aspects of society that have religious tones to, even in a secular context, you know? I mean, we can have a completely secular practice, but because of its the nature of that practice, you know, like some sociologists have called this civil religion. I'm talking about nation as a notion, has a very secular connotations, but have practices which are akin to religion.
Yes, religious symbolism is something that survives. You see, the question arises, what does religion do for society or for the individual? I think it has been argued at considerable length and with a considerable degree of persuasiveness that religions have provided the moral symbolism for holding a society together. The idea of truthfulness, for instance. No social life is possible unless we regard being truthful as fundamental to social life. If nobody tells the truth, then no social life is possible. I can't trust you, what you're telling me. So, the decline in the role of religious institutions and religious authorities and of rituals does not necessarily mean that nothing is left of religion. The role which religion performs has still to be performed. And religious symbolism appears in many ways, and civil religion is a good example. People have talked about the emergence of civil religion in America, where, say, the inauguration of the President of the United States is permeated with religious symbolism, though it is not a religious state. The President takes his oath on the Bible. I don't know what would happen if a non-Christian were to become the President. Or the celebration of events like Thanksgiving in America, which goes back to an incident in the lives of the settlers early on, when American Indians were able to help a particular group of people to tide over difficulties with regard to a shortage of food and so on and so forth. So Thanksgiving is not a Christian festival. It's a typically American festival which has a religious color
undertones.
to it. You could say the Republic Day Parade.
Yes.
It is the grand ritual of the Indian Republic. It has a religious color to it. Or the beating of the retreat. The whole idea of doing it at sunset, that itself, the idea of doing something special and precious at sunset, is an old religious idea. And we have the beating of the retreat at sunset.
Thank you for this very interesting and insightful discussion on religion, culture and society. Thank you.